Life can be full of surprises. Some can be good, like getting that birthday gift of a bag you really, really wanted. And some can be quite bad, from having a leaking roof or even losing your job. And a lot of these bad surprises come with a financial implication. The question is, what will you do in such a situation? Are you going to pull out your credit card? Are you going to go to the Shylock? Are you going to borrow family and friends? So today we're going to talk about how we can build an emergency fund to sort us out in the time of these financial surprises. Emergencies happen all the time. As long as we do not live in a perfect world, we need to be expectant of things sometimes not going according to plan. This, as I mentioned, could be losing your job, could be a car breakdown, could be maybe you having to travel up country unexpectedly because you are needed. So, what options do we have in such situations? Let me tell you about the most common options. Number one is to borrow family and friends. Number two is now to take credit card and also maybe use a Shylock. The problem with these situations is, number one, there is a possibility of clashing with your family and friends in the case you do not pay back in time. And secondly, regarding you taking out a loan through the credit card or even borrowing a Shylock, is the extremely high interest rate. So how do we cater for this? How can we actually plan around this? This is where now your emergency fund comes in. What is an emergency fund? An emergency fund is a stash of cash you set aside for life's surprises. Having had the protection conversation the last few weeks, it's important to note that your emergency fund is your first line of defense when life actually happens. You need to make sure that you have some liquidity, some access to cash, so that when this financial surprise happens, you are able to take money from that pot and you will not have to go into debt or you will not have to borrow to take care of this situation. So how much do you actually need in your emergency fund? So the answer varies, and the answer is it depends. Ideally, the rule of thumb is about 6 to 12 months worth of your monthly expenses. And when you're looking into your emergency fund, it's very important to put some factors into consideration. Number one, are you employed or self-employed? Number two, are you single? Do you have children? Number three, do you have existing loans? Because based on what your answer is, it will really determine how much level of liquidity it is that you actually need. An example is when someone is single, no children, and is employed, their need for their emergency fund is not as high compared to someone who has children, is self-employed, and maybe has a huge loan to take care of. So let's look into it. When you are single, it will be good to have at least 3 to 6 months worth of your liquidity or your monthly expenses set aside in your emergency fund. And again, it is very important also to note that you should put an amount of money that you're comfortable with. This is now at the very bare minimum because you might not have that much responsibility. But again, here is assuming you do not have anybody dependent on you, because dependence does not necessarily just mean kids. It could even be your parents or even siblings. So to be on the safe side, at least try to have 6 months worth of your monthly expenses to take care of an emergency. Yeah. If, say, you are married or you have a partner, you have children, or you're in business, it's important now to look into a much bigger emergency fund because your responsibilities are bigger and uncertainty is even so much more for someone who is self-employed compared to someone who is employed. So it will be very important to strive as much as possible to try hit the 12-month mark. 12-month worth of your expenses when it comes to building your emergency fund. And again, don't be scared. You can start small. You can start from 1 month, building to 3 months, 6 months, and eventually get to 1 year. Again, remember, this emergency fund is meant to make sure that you have a peace of mind knowing that no matter what happens, you do not have to drastically change your lifestyle, your children's lifestyle, because of something that was uncertain. Again, we have a free ebook which has all these things put down where you can actually note, this is my monthly expenses. You have to be able to include your rent, your utilities, things that you actually have to pay. So, yeah? And then you multiply that by the number of months that you want to set your emergency fund for. So please go to the box below to be able to get the free ebook, so that now you are able to note down and get the exact figure for you. Let's start with an example. And at this point, I'm going to use myself as an example. I, Mnyindo, I have 2 young children and I am self-employed. I have a business. So if I was to start building my emergency fund today, what exactly would I do? Number 1 is to track my finances. It's important for me to see how exactly my money comes in and my money goes out. So it will be important now to be able to set a plan or some sort of budget, or to list down what are my current monthly expenses. I have to put down my rent, the utilities, food. Now, when it comes to an emergency fund and you're putting down the expenses, I'm putting down the things that I actually have to spend my money on. It is not a choice. Most probably, I might not include my eating out, but I will have to include, as I said, my utilities, because if I don't pay for my utilities, my electricity can be cut out, or my water bill. So those are the things that are must-haves. That is number 1. So say we've gotten a figure. My monthly expenses is 100,000. And I have children, I have a business, so I need to get quite a big emergency fund. So if my goal is to get to 12 months worth of my liquidity or my monthly expenses, that means I will take 100,000 shillings times 12. That means my goal is 1.2 million shillings. But as I said, do not be afraid. That number might look extremely big, but you can start small. Start with whatever it is that you have, because when you track your expenses, you can see this is the extra amount of money that I have that I can actually set aside to start building my emergency fund. And secondly, it is also equally important to look at what do I also currently have? How much money do I have in my bank account? I can also use that also as a starting point. One of the biggest objections against putting aside money for your emergency fund is that I just don't have the money to do it, and it looks so big. I don't even know where to start. So number 1, remember, we've already done the tracking of your current expenditure, your money in and your money out. So if you found that extra amount of money that you can set aside, it is important to plan and set this aside as a bill. The amount of money that you're going to be contributing towards your emergency fund, treat it like a necessary bill, just like how you treat your water bill or your electricity bill. Because if you do not put that money aside for your water or your electricity, they're actually going to shut it out. So put it at the back of your mind. This is an amount of money I have to put aside. Secondly, because we have also done the tracking, you will know what are the necessary expenses and which ones are not necessary. So maybe you have some number of subscriptions, maybe that you're not using, or subscriptions which are not that necessary, or you eat out much often than you should, right? You might want to actually cut that down so that you have extra money to put aside towards your emergency fund. Number 3, you can use your investment income. If you have maybe some money through different investments, maybe through you bought a bond or you have some shares, you can use the dividends from the shares, or you could even use the coupons from the bonds, the interest from the bonds to contribute towards this emergency fund. Number 4, bonuses at work. Some of us are lucky or blessed enough to get some bonuses at work. So when you get these bonuses, instead of just eating it, take this amount of money and put it into your emergency fund. That is how it will grow over a period of time. Because remember, with your emergency fund, because it's your first line of defense, you have to be extremely aggressive in building it. And 5th, but not last but not least, is now putting your cash gifts into your emergency fund. Some of us receive gifts, whether it's our birthday gift or even anniversary gift, through cash. So instead of spending that amount of money, you could actually put it into your emergency fund so that you can be able to get to your goal as fast as possible. So where exactly do I put this emergency fund? It's necessary to note that your emergency fund has to be extremely liquid, because the reason why we are setting it aside is in the case of an emergency, in the case of an unforeseen circumstance, it is very easy for us to access the money in this situation. So when it comes to setting aside money for emergency fund, I always think of two places. Number one, there is your savings account, because you can get money immediately. And number two, there's your money market fund account. So how I do it is I put a very small amount for maybe same day emergency in my savings account, nothing more than say 30,000, because I want to put the larger chunk into the money market fund account so that it can be able to grow as well. Because remember when it comes to a money market account, there is capital preservation. That means any amount of money that it is that you have put in cannot be affected by the markets. And now the money will be growing with interest. So I put some amount of money in now my savings account, and the rest I put it in a money market fund. But nowadays, money market funds are actually improving. You can be able to access some money from your money markets immediately. So it's important to note that which emergency fund or which money market fund you can actually use to put your emergency fund. And ask around, ask questions. How soon can I receive my money in the case I needed it, or I put an application for withdrawal today? That's going to be very important to note. We've spoken about the ideal vehicles for setting aside money for your emergency fund, but which ones are not ideal? Which tools are not necessarily the best way of setting aside money that you will need when there is an unforeseen circumstance, in this case, an emergency? Number one, we have your retirement accounts, which is now most probably your pension plan. The reason why we're putting money in a pension plan is so that you can be able to grow this money for a period of time to have access upon retirement, so that you have an income for life. The moment you withdraw this money from your pension, it means number one, you are not going to get to your ideal retirement goal. So the amount of money you'll receive at retirement might be less than what you expect. The one thing I have seen from so many Kenyans who have not set aside any sort of liquidity in the case of an emergency is them trying to liquidate their assets or investments to be able to get that money for their emergencies. So secondly, it is not ideal to put money aside, say, in an investment vehicle which is attached to the market, say, for example, the stock market, or even putting money in a bond as a way of getting access to that money in the case of an emergency. We know that sometimes that if life happens and we're trying to pull out that money, it's not assured that we're going to get a buyer, right? Even if you have maybe a piece of land and it's very good quality land, it's in a place that is a prime land, it might not be as quick to access this money. So when it comes also to setting aside money for emergency, do not buy these illiquid assets as a way of this will take care of me in the case of an emergency. We know sometimes to liquidate might take months or even sometimes years. This leaves you in such a tough position, making you borrow. Yeah. Number three, accessing money from your credit card or even Shylock is not the best way to get money for emergencies because of the high interest rates from these loans. This is why, as we said, it's important to set this emergency fund so that in the case this is to happen, you do not have to go into more debt to take care of this situation because, again, remember, you will still have to pay back this money. So let's go back to the three. Number one, do not touch your retirement accounts. Number two, do not touch your investment accounts or do not put money in an investment because of, taking care of an emergency fund. And number three, do not access this money from now loans or credit sharks. And lastly, before I forget, a lot of you Kenyans put your money in endowment policies and think that in the case of an emergency, you can actually have access. Please, if you're putting money aside there, be very clear on your why. You have to remember with any life insurance product, you cannot pull it out the time that you feel like. The moment you try to pull out money from this endowment policy or this education policy, you are actually going to be penalized for it, and you can lose so much money from it. So we've grown your emergency fund. We are now at 6 months worth of your monthly expenses, or we've actually reached your goal of 12 months worth of your monthly expenses. Congratulations. This is liquid cash that stays in your money market to take care of emergencies. But at what point can you actually access this money? I had to bring up this point because I have seen a lot of you accessing this money to take care of matters which are not actually an emergency. And before you access any amount of money from your emergency fund, I want you to ask yourself these 3 questions. It will be important for you to note them down. So the first question is it urgent? The second question is it important or necessary? And the third question, is it unforeseen? I'm going to use 3 examples, and it's you to help me figure out, was this actually an emergency? Let's talk about my friend who has invited me for a birthday trip that was so last minute. She just called me yesterday. She's like, you know what, Mnyindo, we have to go for my birthday trip to Mombasa. And I had not set money aside because, yes, this situation is unforeseen. But will it be right for me to get money out of my emergency fund for this? We have established that this it was unforeseen. She did not tell us in good time. It was very last minute. But is it urgent and necessary? Yes, it is very necessary. It's important because it's our friend's birthday, but it's not urgent. And because it is something that she did not tell me prior, I am not going to access money from my emergency fund to pay for this trip. The most I can do is to tell her a happy birthday and figure out what it is that we can do maybe when she's back from the trip, but I will not touch that money. Next time she will have to tell me in good time that I am planning to go to Mombasa for my birthday so that I can set another account aside to be able to plan around it. Number 2, I have my car insurance that is due. And it is very, very important for me to pay this car insurance because if I don't pay for it, the cops can actually catch me. Let's go back to our 3 questions. Is it urgent? Yes. Is it necessary? Yes. But was it unforeseen? No. The reason why I say it's not unforeseen is because we know that every single year we have to pay for our car insurance. If I pay for it in June, it means every June I have to pay for this insurance. So it's not something that is a surprise. This means that I have to have put aside a separate account, a sinking fund, to be able to take care of these insurance bills. Because the moment I touch my emergency fund, it means that I have not actually ticked all the 3 boxes because this was actually not something that's unforeseen. It means it was just bad planning on my part, right? So it's necessary that for things that are foreseen, like maybe your car insurance or maybe a trip, for you to have a separate account for that situation. Because as I said, unless it's ticked all the 3 boxes, it is not an emergency. Last but not least, I have been called up country. My grandma is not feeling so well and she needs some bit of my help, right? So, number 1, let's go back to the 3 questions. Number 1, is it, urgent? Yes, it's urgent. My grandma is not feeling well. Is it necessary? Yes. I need to be there to be able to help her cater for some needs. Number 3, is it unforeseen? Yes, I did not plan for this to happen. So at this point, I can actually remove money from my emergency fund to be able to buy me a ticket so that I can be able to go and help my grandmother in this situation. And it's also important to see that if you use your money from your emergency fund, it will be very necessary to replenish this amount of money. So again, go back to every single situation that comes up and see if it ticks these 3 boxes. Is it urgent? Is it important and necessary? And is it unforeseen? The one thing that an emergency fund does for you is it gives you a stress-free life. You will actually be walking with your head tall, knowing that there's no surprise that is going to catch you unexpectedly because you have this fund aside. And it's just good manners to just have this amount of money so that in the case of unforeseen situations, you do not have to be at a point of panic. And also remember, as we had mentioned earlier, that your emergency fund is your first line of defense against the unforeseen. But what about the emergencies that an emergency fund cannot take care of? What about something like an illness that you have to be admitted, or someone who passes away? What do we do to take care of that situation? Make sure that you follow us so that you do not miss any of our subsequent videos that we're going to talk about the next line of defense from an emergency fund when it comes to your protection planning.